When one of Hollywood's most intimidating and intense performers suddenly snaps during a live television appearance, the result is nothing short of chaos. That was exactly what unfolded when Tom Hardy appeared on The View and unexpectedly erupted in a moment that left the hosts, crew, and audience frozen in disbelief. What should have been a calm promotional visit quickly spiraled into a confrontation so heated that security became alert and producers prepared to rush the show to commercial. This was not a minor disagreement or an awkward exchange. It was a raw and emotional breakdown that no one in the studio saw coming. The appearance had been arranged as part of a standard publicity tour. Hardy was scheduled for a brief segment meant to spotlight his latest film, the kind of routine obligation actors fulfill countless times throughout their careers. Nothing about the schedule suggested trouble. Earlier that morning, the studio atmosphere was relaxed and orderly. Crew members moved through their usual pre-broadcast routines, checking equipment and reviewing cues, while the hosts skimmed their notes and chatted casually. Everything pointed toward another smooth celebrity interview. Joy Behar, known for her sharp humor and direct style, had prepared carefully. Her notes focused on Hardy's career, his recent work, and his approach to acting. From her perspective, it was business as usual. However, the moment Hardy stepped onto the set, the tone shifted. Several staff members later recalled a strange tension surrounding him. He skipped the friendly exchanges guests typically share backstage and responded to basic questions with short, clipped remarks. There was a noticeable distance in his demeanor, as though he had arrived already on edge. Once the cameras went live, Behar welcomed him with a smile and expressed enthusiasm about discussing his new film. Instead of the expected polite response, Hardy fired back with a sharp edge in his voice, suggesting that the interview was never really about the movie at all. His remarks stunned the panel, prompting quick glances between the co-hosts. The sudden hostility felt jarring, especially so early in the segment. Behar attempted to regain control of the conversation, calmly explaining that the show aimed to highlight both professional projects and the people behind them. Her tone remained measured and professional, but Hardy seized on her words with clear contempt. He accused the show of exploiting guests by prying into their private lives for the sake of ratings. His voice grew louder, his posture more aggressive, and the discomfort in the room became unmistakable. Although Behar's expression briefly tightened, she maintained her composure. She pointed out that no personal questions had been asked and reminded him that he had only just been introduced. Hardy leaned forward, intensity radiating from him, and dismissed her explanation outright. He claimed to know exactly what kind of information the show had gathered about his past, including deeply personal matters involving his family and relationships. He made it clear that he refused to become spectacle or fodder for entertainment. The tension spread quickly across the set. Camera operators subtly adjusted their angles, sensing that the interview had taken a sharp and unpredictable turn. The other hosts, including Whoopi Goldberg, appeared uncertain about whether to intervene or let Behar handle the escalating confrontation. Behar insisted she had no knowledge of the allegations Hardy was making and explained that his publicist had been sent a standard list of potential discussion topics. According to her, nothing invasive or unusual had been planned. Hardy responded with a harsh laugh, dismissing her explanation as dishonest. He referenced sensitive events from his past, insisting those subjects were being prepared for discussion. Behar looked genuinely confused and briefly glanced toward the producers off camera, clearly seeking confirmation. She reiterated that such topics were not on the agenda and that there had been no intention of crossing personal boundaries. The exchange only intensified. Hardy accused the show of hypocrisy, claiming that beneath polite smiles and supportive language lay a hunger for scandal. He declared that drama was the true goal and suggested that his outburst was exactly what the show wanted. By this point, the atmosphere had completely transformed. The audience, once buzzing with excitement, now sat in stunned silence, watching an emotional unraveling unfold live. Behar took a steady breath and attempted to de-escalate the situation. She suggested that there had been a misunderstanding and tried once more to guide the discussion back to Hardy's work. She invited him to talk about the role he was promoting and what drew him to the project. Her voice carried a note of urgency, signaling a desire to salvage the segment before it collapsed entirely. Instead of calming down, Hardy seemed further provoked. He mocked the idea of a misunderstanding and criticized Behar's career, accusing her of building success on situations that consistently cast guests in a negative light. For the first time, Behar's composure wavered visibly. Her response came quickly, firm but strained, pushing back against her accusation as the studio braced for what might come next.
She leaned forward, clearly drawing on years of experience, and spoke with controlled firmness. She said she had been doing this job for decades and had always shown her guests respect. Whatever mood Hardy had arrived in, she added, did not justify the level of hostility he was showing. Her words barely landed before Hardy pushed his chair back and rose to his feet, the sudden movement sending a ripple of alarm through the production crew, clustered just off camera. "Uncalled for," he snapped, his voice sharp and cutting. He said what was truly unacceptable was inviting someone onto a show under false pretenses, pretending one thing while planning another. He accused the program of lying about its intentions and exploiting people's weakest moments to manufacture cheap television drama. The temperature in the studio rose instantly, and murmurs spread among staff as they watched the situation escalate. Behar's voice hardened as she told him to sit down, her patience finally thinning. She said he was creating a spectacle over nothing and inventing a conspiracy where none existed. According to her, he had been invited in good faith to promote his work, and instead he was turning the segment into a personal crusade. Hardy's response came fast and loud, his voice echoing across the studio as he scoffed at the idea of good faith. He accused her of tearing people apart for entertainment, of turning personal hardship into ratings fodder, and of embodying everything he believed was wrong with the industry. The other hosts shifted uneasily in their seats, visibly torn between stepping in and staying out of the line of fire. This was no longer a routine interview derailed by tension. It had become something far more volatile. The studio audience sat frozen, caught between fascination and discomfort, unsure whether they were witnessing a performance or a genuine collapse. Then Behar snapped. Her practiced composure finally cracked, and her frustration spilled out. She told Hardy she had had enough, that he had come onto her show and was behaving irrationally while accusing her of things she had never done. She gave him a clear ultimatum: either sit down and participate in a normal conversation or leave the set immediately. The words lingered in the air, heavy and challenging, and everyone present seemed to understand that whatever happened next would define the moment. Hardy did not back down. His eyes flashed with something dark and volatile as he stepped closer to the table instead of retreating. In the confined space of the studio, his physical presence suddenly felt intimidating. His voice dropped to a low, dangerous register as he repeated her words, telling her it was not her set at all. He said it was a platform she had been given and had abused for years, and that someone needed to finally call her out. According to him, that responsibility had fallen on his shoulders. At that point, Whoopi Goldberg leaned forward and spoke up, her voice firm enough to cut through the tension. She urged everyone to pause and take a breath, pointing out that whatever grievances Hardy believed he had with Behar, this was not the way to address them. She reminded him that they were on live television, surrounded by an audience, and that his behavior was deeply disrespectful. Hardy turned toward Goldberg, his expression hardening further.
He repeated the word disrespectful with biting sarcasm, then launched into another attack. He accused the panel of routinely showing disrespect to guests, of ganging up on those who did not share their views, and of using the show as a vehicle to push agendas while pretending to be neutral. Goldberg fired back immediately, telling him his accusations were completely out of line. She said the show welcomed guests from many backgrounds and viewpoints and treated them fairly, and that they did not deserve to be verbally assaulted by someone who appeared to be unraveling. The word unraveling seemed to strike a nerve. Hardy's face twisted with fury as he slammed his hand onto the table with enough force to rattle the mugs and glasses, sending liquid spilling across the surface. He roared that this was not a breakdown, but the truth finally coming out. He accused the hosts of feeding off other people's pain and disguising it as entertainment. Behar, now fully recovered from her initial shock, matched his intensity without hesitation. She said she had interviewed thousands of people over her career and had never encountered anyone as rude, unprofessional, or out of control as he was being in that moment. Whatever personal issues he was dealing with, she added, had no place on her show. Hardy laughed harshly, devoid of humor, and replied that his personal struggles were his own business. What concerned him, he said, were her professional sins, twisting words, stripping context, and tearing down reputations for sport. Another host, Sarah Haynes, leaned in and tried to calm the situation. She suggested there might be confusion and proposed starting over with a different approach. Hardy spun toward her abruptly, his movements sharp and aggressive as the tension in the studio tightened even further.
"There's no restarting this," Hardy snapped, brushing off the suggestion as meaningless. He said this moment revealed exactly who he was and exactly who they all were as well, insisting that any pretense had finally been stripped away. Behar immediately fired back, telling him that the only mask that had fallen was his, and what it revealed was anything but flattering. She said he was showing his true nature, and it wasn't something anyone should admire. Hardy shot back just as quickly, claiming that at least his behavior was honest. He said he wasn't hiding behind a manufactured television persona, pretending to care, while secretly exploiting people for attention and ratings. By now, the studio audience was visibly unsettled. Some people shifted anxiously in their seats and glanced toward the exits, while others raised their phones, recording the chaos as it unfolded, aware they were witnessing something far outside the norms of daytime television. Behar stood up from her chair, mirroring Hardy's confrontational stance. She accused him of exploiting the platform himself, using the show not to promote his work, but to stage a very public breakdown. She told him that whatever statement he believed he was making, the only real result was embarrassment, and that it was his own reputation taking the hit. Hardy's voice surged even louder as he scoffed at the idea. He insisted that the real embarrassment was how long the hosts had been allowed to operate the way they did without being challenged. He claimed that someone should have confronted them years ago. Goldberg cut in, asking what exactly they were supposed to be called out for, pointing out that their job involved asking questions and having conversations with guests. She demanded to know what his real issue was with what they did. Hardy didn't hesitate. He accused them of pretending to be journalists when, in his view, they were nothing more than gossip peddlers. He said they were tabloid figures disguised as serious television personalities, destroying lives and labeling it news. The accusation clearly struck a nerve. Behar responded instantly, her voice sharp and forceful, insisting that his claim was false and unfair. She pointed out that the show had tackled serious issues, conducted meaningful interviews, and given a voice to people who needed to be heard. She told him that whatever personal crisis he was experiencing did not give him the right to attack their integrity. Hardy practically spat the word integrity in response. He accused her of building a career on controversy, stirring outrage, and deliberately making people uncomfortable. He said she thrived on conflict and drama, and that he refused to play along with her games. The tension in the studio was now unbearable.
Production assistants hovered nervously near the cameras, clearly awaiting instructions from the control room. Security had edged closer to the set, uncertain whether the situation required physical intervention or restraint. Behar's next statement marked the breaking point. She told Hardy she had heard enough, accusing him of storming onto the show in a reckless state, insulting everyone on the panel, and completely derailing the program. She said whatever issues he was dealing with were not their responsibility to manage. Hardy's face flushed deep red, and for a brief moment it seemed as though he might lose control entirely. Instead, he poured all of his fury into his voice, which grew louder and more menacing than anything heard on that set before. He screamed that his problem was with people like her, people who believed they could hide behind powerful platforms while tearing others apart without consequences. He declared that this time there would be consequences, that someone was finally pushing back. Behar shouted right back, asking what exactly he thought he was fighting against. She accused him of rejecting basic professionalism, common courtesy, and simple human decency, saying that was all his outburst amounted to. The other hosts looked desperately toward the producers, silently pleading for someone to step in before the situation exploded further. The audience had gone completely quiet. A few parents covered their children's ears as the shouting continued unchecked. Hardy took another step closer to the table, his imposing presence looming over the seated hosts. He said he was fighting against the lie they told themselves every day, the belief that they were somehow improving the world, when, in his view, they were doing the exact opposite. Goldberg made one last attempt to regain control, telling Hardy he needed to calm down immediately. She said the situation had gone far beyond acceptable limits, and that his behavior was inappropriate for television, for the audience, and for any basic human interaction. But Hardy was no longer receptive. Reason had no place in his demeanor now. His next words were delivered with a cold, deliberate cruelty that sent a chill through everyone watching. He mocked the idea of appropriateness, declaring that everything about the show was inappropriate. He accused the hosts of ambushing guests, manipulating conversations, and profiting from human suffering. He said he was simply giving them a dose of their own medicine. That was the final straw. Behar stood up fully, pointing directly at him as she called for security. She declared that she was done, labeling him unstable and accusing him of indulging in conspiracy fantasies. She said he was clearly in the middle of some kind of mental health crisis and that the show was not equipped to handle it. The mention of mental health seemed to trigger something deep and irreversible in Hardy. His voice suddenly dropped into a low, chilling tone that felt far more menacing than his earlier shouting. He scoffed at the idea of a mental health crisis and said that what they were witnessing was nothing compared to what a real crisis actually looked like. As he spoke, he began pacing the set with frantic, unpredictable movements that made everyone nearby tense. He explained that a real crisis, in his view, was when someone's reputation was shredded by misinformation and half-truths broadcast to millions. A real crisis was families being torn apart because damaging narratives were spread casually on television. A real crisis was careers collapsing because hosts decided to position themselves as moral authorities, judging people without accountability. His words poured out with relentless intensity. Sarah Haynes finally stepped in, her voice firm but trembling, telling him he needed to leave immediately. She said he was frightening people, acting irrationally, and accusing them of things that had nothing to do with reality. Hardy spun toward her with startling speed, his anger refocusing instantly. He told her she couldn't claim innocence, that she sat there every day nodding along while others attacked guests. In his eyes, she was just as responsible as everyone else on the panel. By now, security had begun moving onto the set, though Hardy appeared completely unaware of them. He was consumed by his rage, gesturing wildly as he continued. He declared that what was truly inappropriate was giving people like them a platform to spread harm daily while calling themselves journalists. He dismissed them as gossip dealers, hiding behind the illusion of legitimacy. Behar had reached her breaking point. She shouted for security to remove him immediately, saying she didn't care about his grievances or accusations. She demanded that he be taken off the set at once. As the guards approached, Hardy's demeanor shifted again, becoming eerily calm and almost predatory. He mocked the idea of it being her set, pointing out that it belonged to the network and ultimately to corporate interests. He implied that shareholders didn't appreciate hosts who couldn't control their guests, letting the threat linger in the air. For the first time, Behar looked genuinely shaken. She asked quietly if he was threatening her. Hardy smiled coldly and said he was only stating facts about how the industry worked, about how quickly fortunes could change and how easily careers could end. Goldberg stood up sharply, her anger finally surfacing, and told him he had crossed a line. She said he had no right to threaten their jobs or imply he would use influence to hurt them professionally. Hardy laughed, the sound harsh and joyless. He said he didn't need connections to damage them, claiming they were doing that themselves every day. He insisted he was merely pointing out what was already obvious. The security team stood directly behind him now, hesitant to lay hands on such a high-profile guest, uncertain how far they were allowed to go. Behar regained her composure and responded with fury equal to his own. She said while the confrontation might end careers, it wouldn't end hers. She claimed that once people saw the footage, his behavior would destroy his reputation. Hardy laughed again, this time sounding genuinely amused. He said his reputation was built on portraying unstable characters and that this moment only reinforced that image. Then he turned the accusation back on her, saying her reputation depended on being a professional host, and professional hosts didn't lose control of their shows. The remark landed hard. Behar's face flushed with anger as she insisted she hadn't lost control at all. She accused him of turning a simple interview into chaos. Hardy seized on the word chaos with delight, calling the show a circus and labeling her the ringmaster, cracking the whip, forcing performers to dance for the crowd. Sarah Haynes made one last attempt to de-escalate, saying whatever issues he had with daytime television or the industry, this wasn't the way to address them. She told him he was accomplishing nothing but self-destruction. Hardy turned to her with mock sympathy, saying she was missing the point. He explained that he wasn't trying to fix anything, only to show people what they were really like when someone refused to play along. Goldberg reminded him that everything was being broadcast live. Hardy responded with satisfaction, saying that was exactly the point. Millions of people, he said, were now seeing what happened when someone stood up to the bullies of daytime television and refused to let them control the narrative. Behar delivered her final words with icy precision, saying viewers were watching a successful actor unravel on live television and destroy his own career. She said they were witnessing a man humiliating himself and everyone connected to him. For a brief moment, something vulnerable flickered across Hardy's face, but it vanished just as quickly. He snapped back, saying at least he had the courage to be honest, unlike someone hiding behind a pleasant persona while manipulating others. That was enough. Behar ordered security to remove him immediately, insisting he be taken out even if force was required. As guards finally escorted him away, he delivered a dramatic final warning, declaring that this wasn't over and that he had made an enemy. The threat lingered as he was led off the set, leaving the hosts and audience stunned into silence. When the doors closed behind him, the studio remained eerily quiet. Behar sank back into her chair, visibly shaken. The other hosts sat in disbelief, unsure how to continue after such an explosive moment. What began as a routine promotional appearance had transformed into an unforgettable display of rage, one that would be replayed, dissected, and discussed for years as an example of how quickly the polished surface of live television can shatter.